Hey guys, Yamakiller here, again with a what decks to play this week video. We've been off of this for a couple weeks, but we're right back on the horse now. Now I'm going to be talking over the 6 main Magic the Gathering online formats that we see every single weekend. This is going to be Standard, Pioneer, Modern, Legacy, Vintage, and Pauper. Some of these formats I don't play as much, some of these formats I play a lot, some of these formats I'm testing actively for tournaments, some of these formats I'm just conversing with people who are playing actively for either high stakes tournaments or playing in Magic the Gathering online leagues, playing weekend tournaments, so on and so forth. But I'm going to try and give you all the information that I've got on these formats and what decks I think you guys should be playing this weekend and how to expect each format to move forward. So let us get into it. We're going to start off with Standard. Now, Standard, I watched a bit of the coverage of the Rivals Gauntlet, so I've got a little bit of knowledge on this, and it seems like the best decks that are coming out of that event was both the Red, Green, and Naya Adventures deck, basically using the power of Edgewall, Innkeeper, and Adventures, basically playing your Eldraine block constructed deck, as it's been for the past 2 years, and using the powerful combination of these cards to really gain a lot of advantage, as well as, put on a quick clock in certain spots, especially with the card Embercleave. Now, the difference between the Red-Green deck and the Naya Adventures deck is Naya goes a little bit lower to the ground, uses something like Showdown of the Skulls to gain a lot of advantage. It really has an edge in the Adventures mirror, although it does not have necessarily as many Embercleaves as the Red-Green deck does, or a card like Goldspan Dragon that can go over the top of some of these decks. Now, the last deck I also want to talk about is Sultai Control. While it didn't do particularly well in the Challengers Gauntlet, there is a man named Andy Awkward on Twitter as well as on Magic Online that has top 8'd the last 6 standard challenges with this deck, even winning a few of them, I believe. So that in itself has a lot of power and weight to it, as that result is very, very good and not seen nearly at all in basically any format. So there's definitely something to this deck and something that they have done well. Let us move into Pioneer. Now, Pioneer is a format I don't know much about, and many people don't really play it. Some people say it's dead. But there are lots of tournaments for this on Magic Online challenges every single weekend. There is a PTQ as well as a showcase event last weekend that qualified for the mocks. So there is still reason to play this play this format. Now, let us get into it. Jund Citadel has been doing fairly well recently, basically using the powerhouse of Mayhem Devil, Priest of the Forgotten Gods, and Mana Dorks to power out Bolas Citadel and one-shot your opponent, as well as having a pretty good mid-range plan, getting value out of Priest of the Forgotten Gods on random tokens made out of Catacomb Sifter, and Woe Strider, and Prosperous Innkeeper, and getting Collected Company to get you a 2-for-1, and Bolas Citadel can usually either kill your opponent immediately or accrue enough value that your opponent no longer can win the game. Now, you don't want to think about all these triggers, about how to stack things correctly, about how to do everything correctly. We've got good old Red White Burn. This got second place in the Mox qualifier this weekend, barely losing out on a Mox spot. So this deck definitely has power, and, being on the play with Mono Red, especially against some of these more clunkier decks that have to play a bunch of tap lands like Niv to Light or Lotus Bloom combo, you really get a lot of value out of your cards, especially Eidolon of the Great Rebel. Now, if you want to play some more combo-y cards instead of mid-range or aggro, you've got Lotus Bloom combo. It does very well against a lot of the decks, as it sidesteps basically all removal spells and sidesteps a lot of the interaction they can have, and most people are not playing cards like Damping Sphere in the sideboard to really ruin your day. Burn is definitely an awful matchup, as Eidolon of the Great Revel is kind of ruining the fact that you're playing 21 drops or less that are going to, 2 drops or less that are going to absolutely own you. But if you can dodge that matchup, this deck is very well poised. Now, there are some other aggro decks like Mono Black Aggro, has a lot more staying power and more hard removal spells in the form of Fatal Push, Murderous Rider, and Thoughtseize. Now, you've also got another combo deck in Jeskai Ascendancy, which the players that I've seen playing it, depending on how you want to build it, more of an Omnath deck or more of a Jeskai Ascendancy deck, depending on how you want to combo or play a bit more mid-rangey. But these are some of the decks that I think are very powerful. I think there's no quite one true winning deck in this format. There's lots of different things to do, lots of different decks to play that are good depending on how the metagame is shaking out and what decks are seen play at the most. So, let us move on to the next one. We've got Modern, and I think there are 4 pillars of Modern, and if you are not playing one of these 4 pillars, you're almost assuredly making a mistake. Four pillars are going to be Cascade, which is this deck right here, Crashing Footfalls or Living End. You've got Luris of the Dream Den, which comes in these mid-rangey 2 to 3 color Luris decks, Red Black, Grixis, some form of deck that is really powering out Luris to the maximum using Kolaghan's Command, as well as Snapcaster Mage and some of these other cards. And then you've got Urza's Saga. This can come in the form of Asmore, it can come in the form of Affinity, it can come in the form of a few different decks. You know, some people are brewing around with Renin 6 and Urza's Saga to play a really longer game with those. And sometimes you can even mix Urza's Saga with Luris, depending on the deck, which I've got one right here. This Jeskai Ragavan Saga deck, which I currently am 8-1 with. I was on an 8-0 win streak until I punted off against a Death Shadow player. This deck has a lot of powerfulness. It's got Ragavan and Wells Urza's Saga. And finally, you know, the fourth pillar that I was going to talk about, Ragavan and Dragon Rage Channeler. So if you can pair some of these together, there's not really necessarily one deck list that I think is far and away better than anything else. But trying to play one of these four pillars is one way to go in the format, and I think is the best way to go. Now, currently, what do I think are the best in these pillars? I think something like Grixis Luris. Oh, sorry, this is actually the correct Grixis Luris deck. This basically, you take this deck and cut the Murktide regions, and then add more Mishra's Baubles and such. I ended up getting the wrong deck list here, but you've got the idea, you know, Drown in the Lock, Expressive Iteration, some discard spells. You got Ragavan, Dragon Rage Channeler, and use Luris as your way to really close out the door in the longer games and really shut out by gaining, basically draw two every single turn with Mishra's Bauble, or being able to rebuy your threats that are really good. You got some other decks, you know, like Hammer Time, also using Urza's Saga plus Luris, really having combo kill elements, as well as, you know, going long with something like Urza's Saga, just creating tokens. But basically, what I want to leave you with from the modern format, it's not necessarily any particular deck to go from, but play one of the four pillars: Urza's Saga, Luris, Dragon Rage Channeler / Ragavan, and or Cascade. So let us move on to Legacy. Legacy, much like these other formats, have gotten Modern Horizons 2 to basically like play as many Modern Horizons 2 cards as possible. But there are a few decks that have sidestepped this case, and one of them is Doomsday. I believe Sawartiex. I can't remember his name. I don't have it on Sawarti. Something like this gets to play Doomsday and absolutely crushes everyone with it. So if you have experience with Doomsday, either in Legacy or Vintage, I think this is a deck that is very possibly great. If you can dodge Delver, which I know is one of the biggest decks in the format, basically everything else is supposed to be a great matchup for you. But if you are a person like me and want to maximize your Modern Horizons 2 card potential, Snow Miracles is here for you. You get cards like Endurance, you get cards like Abundant Harvest, you get Prismatic Ending. Basically, you're playing a Bant control shell that uses Uro to the maximum, especially with a card like Just Down. Gets to play a lot of good one-mana removal spells in Prismatic Ending, Swords of Plowshares. You get 6 forces, Jace the Mind Sculptor, etc. Basically, if you want to play control, this is the way to do it. Now some more of the mid-rangey / you know, grindy, or even just some of the best, you know, shells that have been around in Legacy for a long time. This is kind of Delverless Delver, only 2 Delvers now. As you got Dragon Rage Channel as a new Delver, Ragavan as a new Delver, and you can use a Murktide region to really fill out your trying to kill them quickly plan. So this, you know, is your Days Wasteland Force Brainstorm strategy right here. Really maximizes these cards and allows you to get tempo and then kill your opponent, as well as, you know, having these cards like Expressive Iteration that lets you play a long game as well. There's Jeskai Standstill, which takes the Delverless Delver and kind of plays it more of a controlling role using Urza's Saga as a way to get into the long game. Standstill plus Urza's Saga is a very good combo, as you get to draw the 3 cards most of the time, as your opponent has to deal with your Urza's Saga, as well as, you know, a Retrofit or Foundry, you know, pumping out tokens to kill your opponent. Let us move on to Vintage. Vintage, you got your 3 pillars. You got blue decks, you got Bazaar decks, and you got Workshops. Now, if you want to play blue combo, I think Doomsday is the way to go right now. Very, very good. Basically been the top of the metagame since Thassa's Oracle has come out. I think it is the best deck still, even though it's fallen a little bit out of favor compared to where it was. The players who usually play Doomsday do incredibly well with it still, and this is definitely a great combo deck to play. Personally, I'm going to be playing Jeskai Control. I've been having a lot of success with it, doing well in challenges. I went 5-2 in the last challenge. I done well in some prelims as well. I feel fairly good about this, but if you're more of a Bazaar player, Hollowvine You have quick kills with some quick Venge Vines plus Hollow Ones. You also get to play 8 Force of Wills. You get Force of Will, Force of Negation, you get Force of Vigor, and you get Chalice of the Void. And you basically get to accrue advantage with Squee, Goblin Nabob, and Master of Death. And then, force your opponent out while eventually setting up some Vengevine or Root Walla kills. Now, if you want to play shops, you've got Golos Stacks, one of the premier Stacks decks. You've got Sphere of Resistance, you've got Thorn of Amethyst, you've got Phyrexian Revokers, Wastelands, Ghost Quarters, etc., etc. And your top end is going to be Golos finding Karakas and setting up a Tabernacular, setting up some more Ghost Quarters and all these things to eventually, make your opponent not be able to cast cards and eventually, beat them down with a 3-5. Now let us get into Pauper. Pauper is really easy. There are 3 decks you can play. You can play Affinity, you can play Storm, and you can play Dimir Fairies. Do not worry about any of the other decks. They are not playable right now. Right now, because Storm is around, Affinity and Dimir Fairies are basically the only decks that can compete with it, and doing anything else besides playing those 2 decks, I think, is a big, big mistake. So, pick whichever one of these 3 that you enjoy the most, and play them out to your heart's content until there is a ban list update, or some other cards that shakes up the formats. Well, if you like this video, I know I went over a lot of stuff a little bit quickly, and not necessarily as much in depth as I may have or should have, especially with the knowledge that I have on these formats, but trying to keep it a little bit short and brief for each format to give you a little bit of idea of what decks I think are around, what archetypes you want to play, and what cards you want to play. But if you liked any of this video and you liked what you saw, make sure to give me a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, follow me on Twitch and Twitter in the description below, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye-bye.